Up next, we will move right into our panel on innovative technologies for safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene services. I encourage all of you to engage with our panelists, ask questions, and share your thoughts throughout this upcoming panel. And again, you guys can follow us on social media at the Hey Campaign, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and also at We Are Hey on our Instagram channels. Up next, your moderator for this panel discussion is our Hey Ambassador from Asia, Naya Tapo. Naya, are you ready? Because I'm handing over to you.
Yes, I am.
Great.
So thank you, Ashley. So hello, namaste, everyone. I'll be a moderator for this session. My name is Naya Tapo, and I'm a Hey Ambassador from Asia. I belong to an indigenous Idumismit tribe for Arunachal Pradesh, India. And at present, I'm working on climate education and inclusive policy for indigenous. And now moving on to our session, we have wonderful panelists, and it will be my honor to introduce them. So first we have Dr. Karl Payne. He's a water management lecturer in Sherine University, the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Study. Dr. Karl has over 10 years of experience in academia, consulting, and industry, and his research is focused on artificial intelligence in enhancing water resource management to path towards a sustainable energy future. Welcome, Dr. Karl. And next we have Sherine ElWattar. So she is a water management and governance specialist in technical consultant. Sherine is a young, driven, and knowledgeable professional in the field of water and background and specialization in water management and environmental engineering. Welcome, Sherine. And next we have Walter Nonemaker. He's the Director of Operation and Lead Engineer in Healing Water International. He has designed and installed water purification system in Guatemala and southern Mexico. His vision is to give an affordable, safe drinking water in remote communities and to address the issues of water safety and quality that's reliable and sustainable over the long term. So welcome, Walter. And last not the least, we have two amazing young Hey Ambassador, Abdulbasit Mikail. He's a Hey Africa Ambassador, and Singh, Hey Asia Ambassador. Welcome, Abdulbasit and Sia. So we'll proceed to our discussion. And in this session, we'll be discussing on global trend of water scarcity, the major challenges, and the trend of water scarcity related with health and services and provider sector. We will also discuss on management strategies and how to implement and use energy technology to the global water scarcity and how to involve youth in the process. So now moving on to our first question. So I request Sherine and Abdul. Okay, so the question is for Sherine and Abdul. The first question is, how does the increasing global trend of water scarcity and limited access to hygienic conditions influence the prevalence of waterborne illness? Over to you, Sherine and Abdul.
Abdul, would you like to start? Or should I?
Yeah, I think you should go first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for having me here. I hope my voice is clear. If anything breaks up, just write in the chat. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was at first giving a session to the Hey Ambassadors on water management, climate change and water management. And I'm very, very happy that it led to me addressing this question in this summit. The connection between water and health is a little bit complicated, specifically because people have not taken it seriously, except it was a topic that a lot of communities have suffered from for decades and decades, but people have been really giving a lot of attention to health after COVID, after it was a very global movement and everybody felt it, the global north and the global south. But for me to talk about the prevalence or the causes that lead, the connections between water management and health implications, I would like to address water scarcity as a concept. Water scarcity is actually different from one country to another, from one region to another. So we like to say there are two types of water scarcity. There is the type of scarcity that is physical water scarcity, It's a landlocked country that doesn't have a lot of water. It doesn't have any rivers. It has very little wells or groundwater. It really does not have enough water. It's physical water scarcity. And there is the different type of scarcity called economic water scarcity, which means that the country is not able to create the infrastructure or the management schemes that are required to harvest water that you would need for your needs, whether for drinking water, for industrial development, for anything else. You do not have the money that would help you access this water resource. And both types of scarcity are all over the world. And so when we hear the term water scarcity, we need to pause and ask which type of scarcity, because it's very different and the process of discussion and the understanding changes completely. Moving on to its connection, water scarcity and its implications on health, I would like to share with you two stories. I really thought a lot on how to address it, but I decided to convey my answers through these. I'm based in Egypt, I'm Egyptian, and I worked on creating a lot of gender strategies and water management in the region. So I did some work in Jordan, Tunisia, Egypt, some in Uganda, some in Morocco, and I hope to go to other places in the future. However, one of the most interesting connections that I found between water and health was in the field of agriculture. Why? Because agriculture is completely dependent on water. You need to water your plants for every season. You can hear me, or am I freezing?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, you need to water your plants, and you cannot have any fruits or you cannot harvest if you do not have water. That is just the rule, the equation for agriculture. While I was doing my field work in the Egyptian Delta, which is north of Egypt, I was speaking
Sherine, we're not able to hear you.
Hi, Naya. I think Sherine dropped out, so you may want to move on until she reconnects.
Okay. So I'll move on to the next question, and we have for Sia and Walter. So what are some of the major challenges currently facing water or sanitation service provider? Over to you, Sia and Walter.
Please, before C and Walter continue, sorry, I would like to add to what Sherine has said, because I couldn't believe with her more, because water scarcity is very prevalent, especially in grassroots community. I'm very passionate about grassroots community. That is why I'm going to be using grassroots communities as a case study, because increasingly the world population is just getting higher and higher. And this thing has made so many communities in the grassroots communities to be more populated, which results to more waste production. And this waste production are being dumped in the community without a very good management. And these waste are full of so many chemicals that are going directly into our waters. And even the waters, some waters now are having good treatment, while some are having very minimum treatment. So most of the waters the grassroots people drink are mostly contaminated because of much waste being dumped in the grassroots communities. And a lot of people are practicing open defecation in grassroots communities. A lot of agricultural waste and chemicals are being dumped in the community, that is resulting to many health issues and airborne diseases. Particularly my experience as a research assistant with many organizations here in Nigeria, I've been able to visit quite a number of hospitals and ask them questions regarding their health issue. And most of these people, when you go, if you ask them, apart from economic hardship, one thing they lack access to is actually water. And it's not that in some community they don't actually have this water. Yes, they have this water, but they don't actually have a clean water. And some communities are around rivers, whereby, okay, those rivers, the waters there they need to be well cleaned before they can be able to drink it. And they have no option. They have to be taking it that way, which is resulting to a lot of health pandemic. For instance, in my community, that was last 2 years, there was a breakout of diarrhea, which affected almost everyone, every household in my community. It was a real disaster for us because there in the community, we witnessed a lot of death we couldn't help. And this is the result of the outbreak of the diseases. And these diseases, people are already practicing open defecation. You have these diseases and you're practicing health defecation, or you are practicing open defecation. And when it's raining, it wash all the feces you done into water, and other people will take that water, which will result to them being infected by these diseases. And it's a very big pandemic. So I find it so dear to be part of this discussion in addressing it with technology, with emerging technology. Thank you.
Okay, Sherine, if you can hear me, you can continue. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Well, it actually was very strategic because I was like, oh, I have two very interesting stories, and then the line just cut up. But for the sake of time, I can just say that the two stories I wanted to share that tell you the connection between water and health was when I was visiting the Egyptian Delta, north of Egypt, and talking to farmers there that are working with vegetable cultivation. So they were cultivating aubergines, potatoes, tomatoes, greeny leaves. There was one family that welcomed me in their home, and we were having a discussion about water. I was discussing water productivity, something completely unrelated to health. But then the father told me, he was telling me part of the story, where his son usually goes to school and he doesn't want him to be a farmer like him. So I was very curious about this. I was like, why? And he shared with me something very sensitive. He was telling me, when I walk barefoot in the mud because they have lived with their fathers and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers used to be one with earth. So usually when you're doing your farming activities, you work with your bare hands and your bare feet. But lately, for the past 10 years, when he walks in the mud, the wet mud from the water, and he's cultivating and everything, at night when he sleeps, he gets a rash and he starts to itch and scratch. And when he wakes up, he finds himself bleeding. And he didn't know why was that happening. And then he started connecting that when he walks in the farm, when the water touches his skin, this is the result. Ever since then, his son, of course, was very young. He was 4 years old. So he was, the father had already learned the lesson. And his son is not allowed to farm. So when we say, okay, about food security, we want people to farm more, we need more food, but the generations, the farmers are realizing that water quality is making them sick. This is an issue. It's not only in Egypt. When I also went to Jordan and I was talking to them about something, it was also something related to female hygiene. Because in Jordan, there is the #1 workers or laborers that work with vegetable cultivation are female laborers and women, usually single mothers caring for their families. And when I was there talking with a team that was working in the farm, I was discussing with them, when you need to go to the toilet, where do you go? And they tell me there is no access to a toilet, because you're in the middle of nowhere doing your work. And then woman to woman, I was telling her, what about your menstrual cycle? What happens do you have access to health products? Do you feel like you can wash up mid-working day? Because they go and they have to work for at least 9 hours nonstop with their backs bent. They need to pick the vegetables. They need to pick the weeds. It's a very, very physically difficult job. And she was like, no, that doesn't happen. I have to tolerate it until I go back home. And then I take care of myself. And you would see her in the farm, very tired, very sweaty, muddy. And some of them invited me to their homes, and you go to their homes and it's very clean. It's very, like they take care of themselves. They're very hygienic, but the system of the farming is not giving them these hygienic services or these hygiene services when they are doing their work. So I chose these two stories just to tell you like the connection. It could be in the water itself that is used for cultivation, but it's also access to sanitation services that could lead to health implications. Women that don't clean up much might have rashes and skin problems because of a lot of reasons of their menstrual cycles. And the same thing about the food. And of course, when unclean water gets into the vegetables and you eat it, you get sick. So that's why our mothers, usually in Egypt, they put the vegetables for hours in water with vinegar. They try to draw out the chemicals or anything that is not okay. And I'm sure in many other cultures, they do the same. And you could see the difference in the shape of the vegetable or the fruit. You could see it, you could taste it, and your stomach feels it and tastes it as well. So it's a long way to go for us to actually invest. I believe it is an underrated sector in the water management for people to be aware of this connection. And we will need much more investments to address the implications of water with health. And we will feel the price of it in the coming years because we are not yet aware globally of the effect and its branching with the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherine and Abdul. I think Sherine has jotted down a very important point, and that is about the impact of water scarcity in both North and South zone. For me, personally, with my own example, I belong to a farmer's daughter. So we follow the indigenous culture, as you have mentioned. And as you've mentioned that how it impacts more to a developing countries, like you told a story about how the impact of a farmer that went through this system, and whenever there is any the issues, especially related with this, when it comes to technology or anything, people from the global south or the people who are from a different sector, like especially farmers, they have to face it because they are not so knowledgeable in this sector. And thank you so much, Sherine, for putting insightful view on this. And now moving on to the next question. We have our next question for Sia and Walter. So what are some of the major challenges currently facing water or sanitation service provider? So over to you, Sia and Walter.
Hi, Walter. Should I go ahead?
Sure, kick it off.
Okay. So there are definitely many challenges in the safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene services field. But the first and foremost challenge that I think there is the aging infrastructure that underpins our sanitation systems. So these critical systems, often decades old, are in dire need of maintenance, severely compromising their reliability and efficiency in service delivery. Then another pressing concern is the growing specter of water scarcity, which Sherine just talked about, so which looms larger than ever before. Now, this challenge is exacerbated by climate change and the excessive extraction of groundwater, and it affects not only communities, but also disproportionately impacts the vulnerable groups, such as women and children. Ensuring universal access to safe sanitation and drinking water, irrespective of the socio-economic status, is imperative. Moreover, as water becomes scarcer, the rising cost of water exacerbates the already wide socio-economic gap. So we do need to take care of that. Further compounding these issues are reductions in funding for sanitation, infrastructure development, and maintenance also. So these financial constraints, they hinder the ability of investors, that is private investors, to make essential improvements and embrace innovative solutions. So the quality of our water is also at risk due to inadequate sanitation infrastructure, which can lead to surface runoff and leaching of contaminants into groundwater. Now, the most urgent call, which I think for change, resonates from the realm of climate change resilience. So climate change introduces a new layer of uncertainty into our weather patterns, as we know, like droughts, floods, extreme weather events. Now, it is incumbent upon service providers to develop resilient systems capable of confronting these changes head on. So in addition to these technological challenges, we must establish efficient governance systems to ensure the provision of water and sanitation services that are efficient, equitable, and sustainable. Moreover, the rapid evolution of technology, including the advent of AI, has made it increasingly challenging to keep with the latest innovations and integrate them into existing systems. So therefore, ongoing training and investment, they're essential to navigate this complex landscape, albeit at a potentially substantial cost, particularly for small businesses. So those are the points that I wanted to add in this one. Over to you, Walter.
Thank you, Sia. I definitely agree with your assessment and analysis of the situation. And some of the points that you brought out really resonated with me in my own experience. So you talked about how the age of infrastructure is a major impediment as development continues, and how can we continue to provide sustainable water and sanitation services, especially as in many cases shifting populations and population growth and urbanization are outstripping the capacity of this already outdated infrastructure. And then you talk about how climate change also makes everything more unpredictable. So I'd like to focus on those points and keep the conversation in the context of when we talk about what challenges providers are facing in water supply and sanitation services, that this isn't a static challenge. It's not a static problem. We're facing some very dynamic situations globally, like climate change, that are making the very challenges themselves that we face as service providers change in real time. So a couple examples I can highlight of how that's happening in practice. First of all, I could talk about climate change and say that in many regions of the world, especially coastal regions, groundwater, even inland groundwater, is generally becoming more saline and more brackish. And this is obviously caused because of population growth and industrialization and depleting water tables, but it's also being caused in many parts of the world by seawater infiltration because of shifting rain patterns and eventually even sea level rise as we head into more dramatic climate change. So how can we continue to supply fresh water to populations for agriculture and even for drinking when the water tables that populations, vulnerable populations, are relying on are becoming more brackish every year? I've actually worked in some communities where we see salinity increase by thousands of parts per million over a 5 to 10 year period. So to take that one step further and get into a little bit of the technical innovation here, obviously there are effective methods for desalination and for removing salts and minerals from water. But as we all know, all of those methods are very energy intensive, and being energy intensive has additional ethical questions about equity and also about preventing climate change, right? So for example, if we use reverse osmosis to treat brackish water and make it drinkable and healthy and usable for agriculture, what are the energy and the cost implications of that? Is it feasible and is it sustainable? So then we ask, how does that compare to things like rainwater collection? How does it compare to bringing fresh water longer distances over land to populations that are losing access to fresh water where they live? Well, then we start asking ourselves questions. Well, can we use innovative green technologies to do desalination processes like reverse osmosis in a way that's not as damaging to the environment, for example, by using solar power? So this is where the economic challenges of sustainability meet some of the technological interventions that are emerging, especially as we try to approach this work in a way that mitigates further climate change. So I'm trying to keep this as a conversation. I really just touched on one area here, but I want to pass it back to you if you have any comments on that, and we'll continue talking about some of the other challenges that emerge.
I agree with you. I'm not that impressed with the technologies because I've just entered the field, but I do agree with what you referred to. And I just think that I'm not adequate, like I don't have that much of information to share, but I completely agree with you on this one.
Absolutely. So another area where we see this dynamic situation posing emerging challenges for us is in the area of industrialization. So many countries of the world are developing, and that's a good thing. Obviously, we want countries to develop and the world to develop. We want to do that in a way that's sustainable and environmentally healthy. But sometimes the pace of industrialization is outstripping the ability of safe water supply and safe water providers to keep up with appropriate technologies that can keep water clean and safe for drinking. And of course, these are the vicious cycles that we see. So in many regions of the world where there's really a boom in industrialization, manufacturing, mining, even industrial agriculture, this is introducing new contaminants into water sources that are used for, that humans use even for drinking. One anecdote I can share related to that is with some field work I did in Guatemala. So Guatemala, especially the metropolitan area, Guatemala City has had an explosion of industry, manufacturing, and on the coastal plain, which is downhill of the metro area south of the city, we've found in some shallow wells lead in the water. Obviously, everyone knows that lead is extremely toxic and damaging to human health. And we've found lead as high as 64 times the permissible limits as established by the World Health Organization. In that same water, we found mercury at a concentration 15 times the permissible limits. And that can be pretty clearly traced to certain manufacturing processes that are not being adequately regulated in Guatemala City. And then we can also trace that to really high incidence of cancer and even infertility in these regions where these heavy metal contamination are in the groundwater. So there's several moving parts here. We need to look at governance and regulation and compliance for there to be safe disposal and control of industry and manufacturing processes. We need to look at water and watershed management. So in other words, as water is being used for agriculture versus for domestic water supply versus for industry, where does that water go? How is it collected and channeled? So that if there's water that has higher stakes associated with it that could have been exposed to heavy metals in mining or manufacturing, that's not allowed to just go into a river where it's then soaking and infiltrating into a coastal plain where people are drinking out of wells. And then finally, we talk about the technology and innovation for service providers. There are treatment technologies available that can remove those metals and make that water safe to drink and use and even reuse that water. But then the question becomes, how do we make those treatment processes cost effective? How do we run them using green energy? And how do we create economic equity around water supply so that it's available to everyone, even of different socioeconomic brackets?
Thank you so much, Sia and Walter. And I do agree that we need to work on to provide sustainable water system. And as Walter has mentioned that the water issue, it's not just a static problem, it's a dynamic global challenge. And with changes in the global phenomena of climate change, we need to look after this. And I think as Walter has mentioned that how the demand of industrialization, right? I mean, for instance, like in my own example, I belong to a community, a local indigenous community, and at present we are fighting against the government not to build dam. And I think this is also one of the, I think we need to make some inclusive policy, or we need to make some affordable technology so that, you know, everyone, especially as I've mentioned before, that southern people, those developing people, they can come forward and they can ask for their right and they can know what's happening. Like, for instance, you, Walter told about the water in Guatemala, that it has content of lead and mercury. And recently, I think this is something that has been happening in a very small community, even in my own community. I'm sharing a lot of my with my own experience because I can totally relate it. And I think that we need to look forward and we need to look after some sustainable and easy, I would like to say more affordable technology that can help us to face these challenges. So thank you so much, Sia and Walter. So moving on to next question. We have next question for Karl, Sherine, and Shia. What are some of the management strategy that would be implemented to combat global water scarcity, and how can youth be involved in the process? Over to you, Karl, Sherine, and Sia.
Thank you so much, and what a stimulating discussion so far. I just want to contextualize things a bit first from the perspective of small island developing states in the Caribbean. So as was mentioned before, Walter last mentioned it, things like saline intrusion are worsening, not only because of sea level rise, but because of changes in precipitation patterns induced by the climate crisis. So in fact, by 2050, what the climate projections are saying is that this is going to be exacerbated. The projections are saying that there's going to be 10% less rainfall for islands within the Caribbean. So the climate crisis then means a water crisis, implications for agriculture, of course, health crises, and then the nexus between water and energy is an important one. And I think that in terms of solutions, there are exciting ideas coming out of what is called the Bridgetown Initiative, and PM Motley out of Barbados, where the PM in Barbados where I'm based, is pushing this Bridgetown agenda, which is about restructuring the whole global financial architecture to really bring the fiscal space that is needed to tackle these difficult and seemingly intractable problems. Because if we're talking about desalination and the need to reuse water, are we going to put that water in then leaky pipelines, right? And in some of the islands, we have 20 times the burst rate of the global north, right? So you really need the global financial architecture, and the Green Climate Fund is already providing some grants and so on. But I think this problem is on such a scale that if we don't do something more fundamental in nature, then we're going to be talking about this ad nauseum for the next 10 to 20 years. And your generation will continue to be, really pushing for change and future generations and so on. But I think the time is now for us to act. And in terms of other management strategies, I think data-driven decision-making is critical. Many places in the global south, we do not even understand, for example, how much water is available. So you can't manage demand adequately or match the supply-demand dynamics. This is a dynamic situation. And again, to plan on a 10 to 20-year cycle, I mean, and the analogy made is that when you have a mortgage, you get financing on up to 30 years, right? So if you want to manage water adequately and plan for climate resilient water resources management, you need the fiscal space to be able to plan on a more long-term type basis. So I think the last point before I pass it over to other panelists is that we need better governance in terms of coordination among different agencies and so on responsible for water resources management. Sometimes it's done too much in an ad hoc manner. There needs to be a bit more structure. And let's look at lessons that we can learn from other places in the global north and adopt what parts we think are useful, understanding our own nuances in our respective global south jurisdictions, and moving forward in a trajectory that will help us to conserve water and make sure that future generations have good potable water available, which is critical to human health.
Sherine and Sia. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can say something very brief. I thought about this question, and the one thing that I said that came to me was participation. Everything about water is participation. I know that now we're focusing on water management intersection with health, but if we're talking about water with any sector, the highlight of it or the most important aspect of it is participation, which is reflected in governance, as Dr. Payne had just said, because governance is not possible without participation. But for the youth to have an active role in the mission that we are calling for, it is where you need to understand that your age does not indicate that you are less experienced, especially in the water sector, because water is ours. You know, ever since we're born, all of us have been taking showers or swimming in the lakes or finding groundwater or springs. We've all touched it. We've all seen it. It's something for all of us. And then suddenly in the last 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years, it became a science and everybody's giving it a lot of attention, and it's like water, 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 water. And this makes it seem like, okay, now it's like in a foreign language. Why is it so hard for me to understand what water is about? But I am a proponent and an advocate of everybody being a water ambassador. I truly believe that all of us know about water, that all of us teach each other about water. And so through the understanding of our relations with water that comes to our houses, that we see in nature, that we discuss together, that you know, the bottle of water that you drink or the water that you use in your recipe for food, or when you're aware of this and then you start carrying forward this knowledge with other people, raising that awareness, advocating for better health through water, because health could be improved through so many ways, but specifying that water has to be accounted for as well. That advocation, that awareness that other people need to understand that water is a global cause. It's not a scientific cause. It's not a very technical cause. It's all of us are involved. I believe we will be able to influence policy, that our generation will be able to make water a science that is for the people. And I also believe that all of us have to educate ourselves about pro-poor initiatives and technology. So pro-poor is all of us are poor in a way or another. You know, we are not the 1% of society that are incredibly wealthy. So we need to educate ourselves about the decentralized or the small-scale initiatives that are pro-poor, that we can do with least material. Encourage innovations like the one that Walter is working on, etc., to be scaled up, to spread globally. Support initiatives that are small scale with whatever needs that they need, whether support, network, financing, chances, opportunities. And in the end, hopefully, we will be able to create that movement where all of us can be water ambassadors and speak of water and how things could be better. Thank you.
Yeah, would you like to add some point?
I agree with Sherine and Dr. Payne. I definitely. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay. So I definitely agree with Sherine and Dr. Payne. I actually do have to add 2 case studies regarding my last answer because my screen froze. But in terms of innovative technologies and how I said that, due to the advent of technological advancement, specifically due to AI, there are different scenarios where small businesses, they can't afford these technologies in the first place. And specifically when India has a disease called man scavenging, and when we are suffering through systemic oppression in some sort of way. So I don't know how, as people of India, we are going to tackle that, because honestly speaking, as a developing country, it is slightly difficult to acquire all of these technologies and disseminate it. So I think that is a concern, but let's see what happens. And then the second part is when Walter talked about industrialization, how it is affecting natural resources, and how Nia also talked about that there is a dam construction in northeast region of India. There is a very big transshipment project that is happening in the Great Nicobar region, which is likely to destroy a lot of coral reefs. It is likely to destroy the mangrove forests, which are essential to, just to conserve the ecological biodiversity over there. So these are all constructions that are being done to advance our economic GDPs. And as much as it is in our benefit, I just think that it is important that people they give their opinions, and they're able to participate in governance roles so that they know what is exactly being impacted upon. So I feel that, yes, I agree with Dr. Payne that the governance does hold a very important aspect in terms of advancing opinions on climate change. And in terms of youth, how the youth can help in combating global water scarcity. So governance has been one. There is an article that I read also last night. It's about a young Iraqi girl who was talking about how Iraqis, they do not exactly know what their water usage limitations are, and they are overusing water on a daily basis. So if young people like her know exactly, what should be done, why not we extend those governance rules to these young people? So exactly how youth can help in that way. Another thing is in terms of opportunities that has benefited me as well is youth-driven innovation hubs. So these can be on any SDGs, but particularly focused on water-related challenges, it can be a game changer, because these hubs, they serve as spaces where young innovators, they can collaborate, they can innovate, brainstorm, and develop technological solutions for water scarcity issues. So with the right resources, the right resources and funding and mentorship, we can empower them to create groundbreaking solutions. So similarly, what comes to my mind is also startup incubators could encourage youth to explore entrepreneurial opportunities in the water sector. Another interesting thing in we can, I think it is something that not everybody would agree with me, but since we already have tapped into technological aspect of, we have already tapped into technology, I think we can talk about how tapping into the idea of gamification can be really helpful in terms of disseminating information on how to conserve or conserve like water conservation. So for example, we can use technology and education, making water conservation fun, and in fact, like a fun experience for young people. So mobile apps and online platforms can be developed. And if you do not like the idea of gamification, I think we can go for digital water literacy platforms, which includes an interactive platform that can offer courses, games, virtual solutions, again, that can be particularly helpful for young students. So an example that crops to my mind is Charity Waters. There is a NPO called Charity Waters. They have introduced the Spring app. And why do I find this interesting is because the app itself, where users can set up teams, they set fundraising goals and track progress on a real world water project. So the organization, they engage people and actively they contribute to safe drinking water access that makes that a very interactive and sort of competitive experience. And then there is something also that I read about blockchain, which is interesting. So blockchain-based water management system where you create transparent and decentralized water management system. So youth can be engaged in designing and maintaining the systems, ensuring efficient and equitable water distribution while gaining valuable experience in emerging technologies. So I believe these are some of the aspects where youth can definitely excel in terms of climate change, combating water scarcity, water.
Yeah, so Mia, I just wanted to add a couple more points and maybe get broader discussion. So two things that came to mind, really interesting comments, were with the best intentions. I think unless we look at things from a systems type level, we're going to continue in this cycle. What I mean by that is, you could have the best desalination technology. There were the membranes plugging that do the reverse osmosis, and this is because of the industrialization that other panelists have spoken about. So you really need land use policy to go along with the water resources management policies. The other thing is the mix between, and this is a really interesting point that Sherine raised, that I'd like to get the take from others on this, the mix between big decentralized type systems, so water and wastewater treatment, versus more decentralized local scale type systems. Usually with these huge centralized systems, people think, you know, it's somebody else's problem. And maybe they're not as aware of the water resources issue and the need to conserve, as opposed to if, you know, they had maybe a septic system at home and were responsible for maintenance and understood the issues that influence performance. So I just wanted to get others' take on, you know, the right mix and trade-offs between large centralized type systems and more decentralized local scale type systems.
Okay, I have to cut you short. As a moderator, I might get in trouble. We're running out of time. Okay, so thank you so much, Karl, Sherine, and Shia. And I think what Karl has focused and has given the finest example on from the Caribbean island. And I think because as you talk about that, we need a better governance system. And I believe that in order to have a better governance system, we need an inclusive policy so that people from the community can be part of that, so that it can work and give a good performance. I think I have to cut short because we're running out of time. So I'll just proceed to the next question we have. Okay, so we have this question for Walter, Karl, and Abdulbasit. So, okay. Just a moment. Okay. So has there been any success in using emerging technologies in this sector, and how can we interest young person to pursue roles within this sector and also inspire from developing new and effective technology that could contribute to the sustainability of the sector? So I'm sorry, we are running out of the time, so please make sure to look after the time. I wish we'll just complete this within the 3 minutes. So please, over to you, Walter.
Sure, I'll jump in and give a concise answer. I'm an implementer, so this is an area that I can speak into. And I'd like to focus on one innovative technology that is absolutely game-changing when it comes to safe water supply for marginalized populations. This is applicable everywhere in the world, and it's the issue of using solar energy for water pumping and treatment. This is really game-changing because in a lot of cases where marginalized or vulnerable populations previously wouldn't have been financially sustainable for them to have a safe water supply, either because the water has to come uphill. Let's say there's a community of people that are coffee producers, and because they work with coffee, which has to be at a high altitude on a slope, they live above where the water runs down to, you know, rivers and streams and valleys. So for them to have water supply where they live and where they're reliant on the geography for, say, their coffee production, water would need to be pumped uphill. And the cost in terms of electricity, which might not even be available to them, or the cost in terms of gasoline or diesel fuel to run a generator to pump water uphill so that people can have access to it, would be cost prohibitive for this marginalized population. But with solar power, now we are eliminating not only the carbon emissions and the consumption of fuel, you know, gasoline or diesel or electricity, but we're also making water supply much more affordable in terms of ongoing operations and consumable costs to empower marginalized populations. I'd love to expand more on that, but I'll keep my comment brief so we can move on and someone else can speak into any of their technologies or how the youth can get involved in that.
Yeah, so I'll keep my answer brief as well. I think in my own research, leveraging artificial intelligence has really been a game-changing technology, using data for better designs, using data, for example, to understand relationships between climate and water availability, which then feeds into better decision making. Because I think data are key, but in the global south, the key issue is, you know, the technical expertise to build the AI models. So we need to overcome that digital divide if we're going to democratize artificial intelligence and make the big global impact around climate issues and the nexus with water.
Okay. I think the part I'm most interested in is how we can interest young people to pursue a career in this sector. I think I'm going to mention 3 key points that I think are very important, which is first, we are having a lot of intervention from development partners when it comes to water management. But one important thing I want us to consider is that now more than ever, there is need for more improved project indicators when it comes to implementation of water management in grassroots communities. Like for instance, it's not all about ensuring that these people have the water in their community. How can we ensure to actively engage these people where if the organizers of the program management, water management system are not in the community, how can you empower these people in this community to be able to manage their water by themselves? I believe water management skill is a very important skill, and I believe to some extent it is something that will be very easy to learn, and it is something people in the grassroots community can actually find it very easy to learn and also manage their water. I believe that will be very sustainable. Another important thing is that I love the fact that Mr. Karl mentioned governance. I think it's very important. We know that a lot of investment is going into water management in a lot of countries, but the thing is that there is lack of implementation. And where are these funds going? A lot of places, a lot of projects have been announced that it will be implemented in many grassroots communities. But when you go back to those grassroots communities, you find out that there's nothing there. So I think it is important that we leverage the emerging technologies now of tracking constituency projects, whereby young people can actually engage in and ensure they engage the government in saying, okay, we learned that there is supposed to be a project that's supposed to be implemented regarding water management in this community, but we can't see anything. So there is need to promote more youth participation in holding their government accountable when it comes to water management, to ensure that the funding allocation for water management in grassroots communities is very, very enough to carry out those activities. The third thing is that how can we ensure to promote locally made water management system? For instance, I would like to tell a short story of 2 young girls, which is Ajara and Boluwa Femi, which I believe some of you must have heard of them. They are from Lagos, and they happen to be the winner of the Stelcom Water 2023 award, where they created a thematic distillation water, where they use locally made material to filtrate water in their communities, because they live in a riverine community and the water they are using there is very dirty and contaminated with a lot of chemicals. So they use the locally made materials to construct the technology machine where using solar, it filtered the water they drink in the community. So I believe initiative like this.
Sorry to cut you, Abdul. We are running out of time, so can you make it short?
Okay, let me conclude. Let me conclude.
Sure.
So, such initiative need to be promoted, and more investment needs to be going into those kind of initiative, and ensuring that young people, beyond the theoretical aspect of it in the class, are engaged in the practical aspect, so that they can as well do things like that in their communities. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. So right now we are running out of time, and let's just rush to Q&A. And let me check if we have any question. Okay, we don't have any questions. So, okay, we have come to the end of the session, but I'll just ask the panelists just for a minute, just take a 1 minute. And if you have any final thought before we close this session, please, we have to also look up the time, but I would request you to say anything, just in a minute, please. Anyone?
I think I'll go then. I believe conversations like this are very important, and I believe all what we've said here is going to be used to engage in high-level discussion to ensure inclusive policies around water management and water scarcity and sanitization in our environment. I believe having those policies in place will ensure enough investment in that sector, and we need to keep telling people every single day that this is the impact of climate change on water and sanitization. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Abdul. So over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Naya. Thank you. I mean, after hearing that panel discussion, we are having such a rich conversation here during our 6th Global Youth Network Summit. And again, remember to follow us on Instagram at We Are Hey, or at Facebook, at LinkedIn at the Hey Campaign.